Kia ora everybody, and welcome back to the Good Day Matrix. My name is Daz, and I have the absolute privilege today of interviewing the legend Te Pūoho Katene. Now, when I first got to meet Te Pūoho, his energy, his mana, his passion for everything he does just leapt through the screen. He's incredibly driven by three fundamental kaupapa: impact, indigenous, and investment. No intro will do him justice today, but I'm going to give it my best. A graduate of Stanford Business School, Fulbright Scholar, and Obama Foundation leader, Asia Pacific. He brings a global outlook on leveraging local best practice within an Indigenous values-based lens. An executive director of Te Pūoho Whakatupu Trust and board of trustee for Ngāti Toa. Director of Armillary Private Capital, Wakatu Inc.'s Manaki Board, Waikato Tainui's Distributions Committee, and as a trustee of the Akina Foundation. Now, I flat out know I missed so many things there, and I feel like I've only nailed the tip of the iceberg for you. So what do you reckon, TP?
Kia ora, Daz. Thank you for the introduction. And it's many hats. It's certainly daunting just hearing it myself, to be honest. But I think the most important part I always talk about, it sounds great on a LinkedIn page, but you know, I did my schooling at Wellington College. I studied tertiary at Victoria University and then at Stanford, but my education came at the knees of my elders and my whare tupuna at Ngāti Toa and Takapua here, where I grew up. So I think it's all important to have it in that context, and that's all window dressing for what really shaped me. And it's within that mana that I stand today. And mihi to you and to all of the people who tune in.
Thank you. And look, that literally leads us straight into where we start, which is identity. And when we talked, I loved how you spoke about how that you're a reflection of your elders and you're a manifestation of your ancestors, and that you don't take that lightly. And there was a quote that you said that I will be your confidence until you have confidence. And I just think that's an incredibly powerful way to see yourself in the world and see the people around you who support you. So tell us about your whakapapa and tell us about your legacy.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, te uri tēnei o Ngāti Toa Rangatira, o Ngāti Whātua, o Ngāti Tama. I hail from Ngāti Toa, based in Pūrerua, Wellington, down to the top of the south. My mother's whānau is Ngāti Whātua in Ngāpuhi in Northland, from Dargaville, Whangarei area. And my Ngāti Tama whakapapa also connects to the top of the South Island and in Wellington as well. And that's a really important legacy for me. I connect very strongly with the journey and the legacy that I was given by my ancestors and the courageous steps that they took. And it isn't just a list on a page for me of different names. I have a living relationship with my whakapapa. And often in times when you move into areas that it might only be you, and you might feel like you have that imposter syndrome coming in, I take great solace in understanding I don't have to find these characteristics out of nowhere. I don't have to conjure them out of the ether. They've existed in my genealogy for 1,000 years. My ancestors were explorers, adventurers, entrepreneurs, philanthropists. They were international traders. And so it gives me great comfort understanding that I don't have to learn something new. I just have to remember. I have to remember that legacy that we carry. And then in doing so, and understanding the privilege of carrying that legacy, is how do I contribute and enhance that legacy for my children and their generations to follow. And so having that living understanding with my whakapapa, you know, I can recite from Hoturua, the captain of our Tainui Waka, all the way down to my children. And I sit there with my children. My daughter's 7, she can recite from Maui Tiki Tiki a Taranga down to her. And that's a beautiful thing to see manifesting in our young people. I took 30 years to get to this point where I can understand that they're born with it as their innate right. And if there's one thing that I can teach them as a father and be a good father, it's that whakapapa is your superpower. No matter where you go, you'll never be walking a new path because that path has already been laid for you by that legacy. And so all you have to do is take steps on it. And that is a great sense of when you feel like you're not enough, it's nice to understand that remembering your ancestors made you enough. Yeah. And you just have to take the next step.
That's incredibly powerful. It's such an important thing for people to start to understand that also, because we do often feel alone, or we feel really lost in a journey and not really sure where we're going. And if we can connect to knowing, hold on a minute, there's a lot of people, you know, that are around me all the time, and I just need to, you know, feel that power and feel that legacy that sits around you. And yeah, the step forward, so important. And I think that's more than anything, the step forward's the key, right? Because if you don't do anything, nothing's going to change, and you're not going to go anywhere if you don't just take that one, even if it's tiny and small, just one movement forward.
That's right. And I think just touching on that quote, so that quote was from one of my whānau, Bentham Ohia. He runs a program called the Masters of Māori and Indigenous Leadership as part of the University of Canterbury. And he had convinced one of his relatives to join the program, who wasn't an academic, who was a mature student. And after the first week, she was panicking about the readings that had been sent and about the literature that she'd been exposed to. And she called Bentham and said, why have you done this? I can't do this. And Bentham's response was, I have absolute complete faith in your ability to do this. I've done this. I've seen this program. I know you can do it. And it's understandable that you're not comfortable yet, but I will be your confidence until you have that confidence in and of yourself. And if I can personally, take that and say, if I can be someone else's confidence in these areas of misgivings until they can find that bridge for themselves, I think that's a really key part of contributing to my social fabric and my social network around me, to make sure that we all move forward together and take that step together.
Yeah. And you're also sharing with people to give. So, you know, you give, and there's kind of that kaupapa that sits underneath it, and then I expect you also to give when you've got the opportunity to, and it just keeps everybody moving in. Talk to us about your connection with tangaroa.
Tangaroa has been, always been there for me. I grew up next to the ocean. My mother still lives on the beach down in Plimerton. Tangaroa is the place I go for my calmness, for my zen. The ability to escape the madness of everyday tumult that we find ourselves in, and the ability to dive down into the water and hear nothing else around you, and just to be in that place at the time with complete focus, and to be embraced by that environment is something that has been a really positive influence in terms of providing the active zen that I think we need to continually balance ourselves out. So tangaroa, clearly we have that whakapapa link, and has always had that instilled within me, in our ability to be not just kaitiaki, but also use the bounties of tangaroa to provide for our families as well. I'm an avid diver, free diver, spearfisher. It's more theoretical than in practice these days with how busy things are getting. But I think the thing with tangaroa and with hine moana is that there are elements, there are masculine elements, there are feminine elements. They are all captured in the same space, and so you can be in both sides of things. You don't have to be rigid in how you consider the world. And so with tangaroa, that's really from a young age, having that personal connection with the sea, coming home and seeing like carding or seaweed drying all around my house with my grandparents. Having toheroa at our hakari when I was growing up as a child. That moved into a professional side of things, where being at university, studying biology, I was doing molecular biology, but then my purpose, the purpose of trying to change the world for Māori, connected with the timing of the Māori fisheries settlement. And so I pivoted from molecular biology to marine biology, understanding that as this happens, there's an opportunity for us to strengthen our tethers to tangaroa by making sure we can walk both into our Māori and practicing our mātauranga and our tikanga, but also integrating elements of science to make sure we have the best sustainable management and kaitiakitanga as we move forward, and make sure that relationship with tangaroa continually evolves, but also reciprocal in nature and not just extractive.
Yeah. And isn't that a great metaphor for all of our relationships?
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot to learn from just that one line there. So we'll move into body. And so a lot of people think when we talk about well-being, it is only body and mind. And that's why we always start with identity, and that's why we talk about community environment as well. But your body, when we were going to start here, really links into identity and community and environment at the same time. So we're going to talk about what you do with your Kapa Haka and what that does for you and what that does for your whānau.
Absolutely. So I've been, for the last 10 years, I've been a performer in a small Kapa Haka group here in Te Tairāwhiti in Gisborne called Waihirere. And it's been a really large part of our lives. And anyone who's done hakas understands that the kind of logistical commitment of joining a Kapa Haka group. It is grueling. It is, it really tests your mettle, really tests your commitment. But at the same time, it's the most rewarding thing that I do on a consistent basis. I could leave my suit and tie and pocket square job in Wellington, get on the road, get up to Gisborne, and stand in our wharekai in the rows and just be confident in bringing our full Māori selves to the fore. And I thought that was sometimes when you're in spaces that aren't necessarily conducive to expressing yourself in those kind of ways, you do need an outlet. And for me, Kapa Haka very much provides that. And it's not only that, it's recreating that social, the social weavings that we had as children that have pivoted as society moves around today. And so it's not just me being in there, it's bringing my children in there, it's bringing my my wife into the fold and making sure that it's not my group, it's all of our group. I might be the one on stage, but they are equally woven into to that group. And physically, I think I'm a very competitive person. I played competitive sports for a long time, and I thought, oh, I'll do Kapa Haka. It might be a bit easier on the body than, say, American football, which was my jam.
Yeah,
I was sorely mistaken. And so Kapa Haka is absolutely grueling physically, but it does give us a chance to tie both the learning element. We dive into the depths when we're writing and composing and learning these items, and then the physical exertion that goes with them, the feeling of vitality that you get from both the personal expression, but also from the energy and the exuberance that you get to display on that stage. It's a real, as I said earlier, it's that active Zen stage. I can't sit there and do nothing. That's it's not something I can do. I can't just chill out. And so having something that I can completely disconnect from the tumult that's all around us in our professional lives, and I get to go back and just be Te Pūoho in the ranks, in the rows, those spaces, is something that I don't know what I'd do without. And to be honest, we've had delays, of course, with COVID. We had 2 years of delays for Te Matatini, and so the ability for it to stand up in Auckland only 3 weeks ago was well overdue, and it was a beautiful occasion. We had 1.8 million people tune in and watch it all around the country and the world, and so I think that was a real celebration of what it means to be like socially wealthy as a culture and as a whānau. I think that was really beautiful. Yeah,
we watched it. Te Matatini was on in our whare for all of the days it was going. My children were just in awe. My son, so we're obviously New Zealand European, my son's in the Kapa Haka group at his primary school.
Awesome.
And he does his best and he's getting there, but it really means something to him. And so he sat there in absolute awe. He's 9 years old, and the power and the mana, and you can tell that every single word everyone's connecting to, and just the fact of how beautifully everyone can move in time. Like there's, and the penalties, obviously, even if a poise drop, anything like that, like it was just magnificent to watch and be a part of. And our whānau will definitely go next time. Like that's something we want to be around in the flesh, because I don't think there's anything like it. That was just magic. So to be part of it, epic.
Although I am enjoying having my weekends back for a little bit.
Yeah. That's with anything though, right? Big project, and then nice to have your downtime. Now, you said that you don't listen to your body very well. That you often push through things like a lot of us do. So talk to us about how that may not have served you so well and any changes that you've put in place.
Yeah, and I think it's part and parcel with being both ambitious in terms of career goals as well as personal goals, and competitive is there's that mindset that I can't take a backward step. I can never take a backward step. And even when you're getting to a point where saying, actually, my body's not able to keep up with the stress that I'm asking of it. It was okay when I was in my 20s to say, actually, it'll be fine. Just keep pushing through. Everything will work out. It doesn't work that way anymore. Your body responds to what you do. And if you choose to ignore it, then there's some consequences, and those consequences get bigger and bigger the older you get. And so, like, for me, going for Kapa Haka was a big one as well, in terms of I'd fly into meetings around the country, come in late on the Friday night, straight onto the haka floor, and did that, tore my calf, because just asking too much about yourself.
Yeah.
But really, it hit home for me, with all of the different hats that I try to wear, and all of the kaupapa that I'm dedicating myself to. You can't take time off from that. Like, kaupapas don't end at 5 o'clock on a Friday night.
Yeah.
And you think, I'll just do a little bit more here, write one more paper here. And the next thing you know, I ended up in hospital last year because I wasn't listening to my body. The signs were there, and I said, oh no, it's just a blip, I'll be fine. And ended up being in hospital for about 3 days, just getting my body right. And it was ugly, in terms of, I hadn't felt that way before. And if I hadn't had my family around me to say, this isn't okay, we need to get you to the A&E right now, then I could have been in a lot more trouble. And all because I was too stubborn to step back and take a break from everything. Saying, if you're selecting the kaupapa over yourself, then everybody loses.
Yeah.
So in order to help your family, in order to help the things that you care about, you need to take care of yourself in the first instance. And that was a very clear learning. It was like the stakes were a bit higher than I should have let them be. Yeah. But it's good to have that now and have the benefit of hindsight in that. And so making sure that we make adjustments. And the other thing that a great piece of wisdom that I was given was, every time you say yes to a new kaupapa, you say no to your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you better be really sure about what you're saying no to your family for. And that one is one I'm still getting better at. I'm terrible at saying no to things, but it's something that needs to be at the front of our minds. And if we can put it in the minds of people in the early stages of their career, their entire life would be much better for it. Yeah.
Particularly if you can literally measure it off that. I think you and I talked about it when we caught up, because I've said that to my husband since. And, you know, because we pick up work all the time. And that's what I said to him. He's like, oh, we've got this new project. Mike, just remember, though, you're doing that means less time here. And so I think that's an amazing measure, because it makes it real really quickly. Because I don't want to detriment my children by not, you know, like, immediately your heart's like, oh yeah, hold on a minute. Is that actually the right decision for our whole family, and not just it feels good that someone asked me to do this cool thing? So pride and ego, eh? What other things do you do for your body outside of Kapa Haka?
I love going to the gym. It's just, it started with hakas. You know, nothing motivates you to put your best self forward like standing in front of 40,000 people in a pew. But it's more than that. It gives me a chance to go somewhere. And just like with my relationship with Tangaroa and being able to isolate in that space, when I'm at the gym, all I have to worry about is moving a bar from here to here. And there's nothing else in my mind. I don't have to delve into it or worry about what my next meeting coming up is. It's a way to embrace that active zen. And the more ways that I have to do that, the better chance I have of maintaining that balance in and of myself. I think that there's a generational push to think that we must be working all the time. It was really valued in the previous generations. It was instilled in us. I think that the next generation have more of a sense of work-life balance being crucial to personal and collective well-being, and that's great to see. I think there's still a balance that I have to find for myself in our situation, and so that's the way, in terms of finding my own personal balance. Having as many avenues for that active zen as possible is really good. Look, it's not always all physical either. I also I also embrace my inner teenager and play some video games now and then.
Nice.
Because having that break's important, and
Yeah.
you can't just be running 100 miles an hour physically or mentally all the time.
Yeah, recovery is critical both for body and for mind, but we often throw recovery to the side, even just if it's a stretch session after the gym, which is a minor one. But like if you've got a massive day at work and you've got back-to-back meetings and you've got massive reports to provide, produce or whatever, you can't back that up the next day and think you're going to come at that again if you don't sleep well, don't eat well, don't do the things that fill you to come again. So then you're coming in at 70 and then you come in at 50, and you've got to start really seeing, if I've got a hundy day, I've got to find a way to recover. A, prepare myself before that happens. B, take care of myself through it. And then C, recover afterwards so that I can come back up. But 5 days a week of that, it's just something's going to give. And none of us want to find out what it is.
Part of it is the fact now that we can do online and remote working, is we're getting really bad at not leaving buffers in between things. And so I'll have a day full of meetings with zero break. You might have half an hour in the middle of the day. And that's just not sustainable. At least when it was physical meetings, we'd actually walk between meeting rooms or things. But I think that's something in terms of having buffers, not just in terms of logistical buffers, but like the ability to change your mindset, because it doesn't do your next meeting any good if you haven't left the previous meeting at the door. And so I think really building those buffers in is something that from a day-to-day practice is a really important one. Yeah.
And great point. I hadn't thought about that, but like I used to drive between meetings across town for different things, and you'd have your music on in the car and you'd kind of like decompress and you'd process what had gone on and maybe write yourself some notes once you stop going, oh yeah, that's right, I hadn't thought about that. Whereas when you're just stepping in from one to another, you can't actually have even really processed what's gone on in the one beforehand.
Yeah, it's usually that point where the Zoom is connecting.
Yeah.
When you click the link and it's loading up the screen, it's saying, what meeting is this?
Yeah.
Instead of actually stepping away and say, okay, what have we got next? Who are we talking to? And how do I give myself to that meeting and the previous stuff in its own space?
Yeah. And being prepared, I think we've stopped being as prepared as we used to, because we kind of think we'll wing it because it's chocker, instead of going, okay, I need to read this first and make sure I'm ahead of it. Yeah. And not wasting someone else's time. So we'll move into mind. Now, you mentioned an outstanding Game of Thrones quote when we caught up, which made me giggle. So I'm going to leave that to you to share, but you've got an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. So talk to us about leaning into things that you're interested in and what you do for your mind. Sure.
So the Game of Thrones quote, I was a great lover and aficionado of the shows and the books. And I always connected to one quote in particular from Tyrion, if anyone's familiar with the show. Tyrion is a voracious reader, and he talks about books and how the mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone. And it's how we sharpen, it's how we expose ourselves to new and non-consensus thinking, if we can, how we start bringing and integrating these different lenses and viewpoints that might not exist in our natural settings. And so reading is a real, I think it's been one of the largest part of my intellectual development. My mother really drove home. She'd take us to the library all the time when I was a child. As children, we had to do book reports from a young age in order to get pocket money. And I'm doing that with my children. It's an important, it's always trying to make sure that they're reading a diversity of material. And I think that's really key as well. Don't just read the stuff that you naturally gravitate to. Try to bridge the gap and look at new learning. And so for myself and how I approach the intellect side of things, it's not enough just to absorb information. I try to put myself in a position to master the hyphen. And what I mean by that is take things that might not necessarily be related, whether it's disciplines, whether it's characteristics, whether it's sectors, and find some of the synergies or the linkages that can bring those worlds together. And so, I read a lot of Shakespeare. I read a lot of science fiction. Read a lot of New Age business and economics books, and there's value in being able to understand the different interlinking parts of those.
Yeah.
And I think there's parts when you can quote people from the the famous English medieval literatures, or you can quote the Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings and these different kind of books. I think it helps to understand that you've spread your tendrils of learning as far and wide as you can. But once that information gets to you, you're doing something with them. It's not enough just to regurgitate. You need to be able to absorb and then synthesize and then create something new and master that hyphen between the spaces that weren't necessarily previously well established.
Yeah. And talking about like reading diversely, it's also once you know better, do better. Like I've actively been trying to find books that really challenge, not necessarily like I'm incredibly empathetic to the majority of things that go on, but I'm often not thoroughly aware of all of the details and the ins and outs. So I'm trying to really push myself to understand. So once I know better, do better, and also understand, my place in it and how I can actually help different things that are going on, and not to just insert myself because I can, but actually how could I meaningfully help what's going on? And is it just that I use my voice and talk about things to highlight it when I have platforms to do so? But, I think that's a really key message. It's what we talk to my children about often as well is, now that you know that, you can't go back to doing what you were doing before. There's a step forward to take now of, okay, well, now I take care of this person in a different way, or now I understand what's going on for that person, so I'm going to do this. So yeah, I think there's that reading diversely and listening to different podcasts and watching different, even movies, things that are just not what you would normally go for, and then see the different perspective, understand a new way, and then know better and do better as you go forward. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think education is all around us. It's not just in schools. It's not just in textbooks.
Yeah.
You can find learning wherever you go. It's how you apply that learning that's the key element of it. But one of my old lecturers would always talk about porpoising, and what he meant by porpoising is that particularly now we tend to have quite a surface level kind of shallowness to some of our conversations, or a very generalistic approach to how we deal with issues.
Yeah.
But it's not until you dive deep and you porpoise down into the issue. In Māori would say ruku hia te kura huna, like dive into the esoteric or the unknown areas, so that you can have that depth of knowledge. And when you come back up to the surface, you can apply it in a more general way. But unless you have that depth of knowledge, then we're just surface skimming, and that doesn't do anything to advance the general discourse that we're engaging in. It's when you surround a table with deeply informed but very diverse viewpoints that we can start moving that discourse along. Yeah.
I'm just working with a group at the moment who are working with their board to strengthen some of the things that are going on. And I was like, do you guys mostly agree on things? Like, no, we all get along really well. I'm like, that's kind of one of the things I would probably challenge you on, because if you've got 10 people sitting in a room and not one person's challenging any of the ideas, then 9 of them are useless. And so really, do you need a board at all? And they're like, oh. And I was like, you want diversity in here that is challenging thought, who have different experiences, so that you make sure there's a robust thing you deliver at the end of it, not, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, give it a nudge. Oh, that sounds fabulous. And not challenging, even just to strengthen the actual delivery of what they're thinking about doing. So it's incredibly important to keep pushing people to challenge in safe, psychologically safe ways, and not just attacking for no reason, but incredibly important.
Creating that environment as well, whether it's a board table, whether it's in your team, whether it's in your community, in our society. I mean, we're seeing that at the moment. We need to build that understanding that disagreement doesn't equal dissension.
Yeah.
Like, we can healthily disagree. That's the beautiful thing about having these different worldviews and perspectives. Yeah. But I think all it requires is, well, one, a basal level of respect for other people. People might not share your mindset, but that doesn't mean that it invalidates their position. And I think being more free with our empathy and our understanding of other people, that they've gone through different journeys to come through to their new conclusions and their own conclusions, and that's up to them. Kaya rata tērā. I think that's really important. Respect for others, and create an environment of respect where we can disagree on issues, because it's through that disagreement and through that, like sharpening with a whetstone, you need that abrasion in order to get to the point where we're getting the sharpest decisions and lines of thinking as we can. And you can't do that with being in an echo chamber. That just makes everybody the worse off, because otherwise everyone's just patting backs, and no one's really testing whether or not we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So disagreement is a really healthy part of whatever social circle you might be, particularly around boards. We have plenty of challenging discussions in the boards that I'm on, and I think we're better for it. I'm certainly better for it as a director and as a trustee.
Yeah.
And it's through being challenged and challenging that we're able to have that reciprocal relationship, to make sure that we're all doing better ourselves.
Yeah, and I'll get out for staying on this, but this is where my wheels spin. It's making it safe in a way that if somebody does challenge you, you don't rip into them, or even just in your body language, be like, are we having a go out? You know, like it's how as leaders that we accept, we welcome it, we're vulnerable, and we're like, hey, or how we even approach it first, like, hey, I really want you guys to tear it apart, or, you know I haven't done thorough thinking on it, so give me, and and really drive it. And then what happens next is tell them the changes you made as a result of what they said, or that how your thinking's changed, because then they're going to do it more. But if we don't make it safe and we don't welcome it and really put it on a platter to be pulled apart, then people don't, because they're so, and in our economy, right, like so many people are losing jobs everywhere, so people are really worried. And so it's just how to make really safe spaces, because businesses will be so much better. Anyway, gets me all head up. So there's a quote from C.S. Lewis about humility. And so it says, true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I love that just a comma in a different place, can just change how something is said. But talk to us about, self-deprecating thoughts and the importance of sort of giving yourself permission to succeed, because we often do tear ourselves down or don't take opportunities that are offered to us. So how are you doing that to role model that for yourself and for your son and for other people around you?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem we have as a country in terms of the self-deprecation or our self-expectations, and where we're setting the bar too low. The whole tall poppy syndrome it's alive and well. For Māori, like I was brought up, as many of us were, with a whakatauki constantly ringing in our ears. Kaore te kumara e kōrero ki tōna reka.
Yeah.
That speaks not of its sweetness.
Yeah.
And that speaks to whakaiti. And I love the concept of whakaiti. I think it's really important. It's a really key part of our culture and who we are and how we express ourselves. But I do think that whakaiti is being interpreted in a misguided way today, into thinking it needs to be self-deprecation. It needs to be dimming your own light so that other people don't feel intimidated. I think for me, the way that whakaiti works is that the missing part of the equation, it is by others that we lift individuals up. And so when we look at that quote from C.S. Lewis, it's about thinking of yourself less. We contextualize our own success within the success of the collective. So as a part of my whānau, my hapu, my iwi, like when I stepped foot onto campus on the farm, they call it the farm at Stanford, it's huge. Surrounded by CEOs, startup founders, private equity, bank managers and partners. I knew I was just a little boy from Pūoho, and I didn't know what I was doing here. I'm just a kid from the pā. But it was in those kind of environments when you're surrounded by amazing, brilliant people, and you slowly start to learn, well, yes, they're all brilliant. They're no more brilliant than the people I know back home. They're no more brilliant than me. And it was really hard to get to a point to say that. I said, I'm keeping up with everybody. I'm not out of my depth. And the most important thing is that they believed in me. So at Stanford, the motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. And they all really believe that. They honestly believe they're changing the world in what they do. And they also believe it of you. And so when you have these people that are so intimidatingly awesome, thinking every day and saying, you're amazing, you're going to do all of these great things for your people. When you hear that support, you eventually have to start believing it for yourself.
Yeah.
And that was, in terms of the conversation we had about someone else being your confidence until you have it, that gave me a lot of confidence. And it gave me the confidence to move my moonshot goal to being much greater than I ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
Because I didn't dare to dream previously. And it wasn't until I had that confidence from others that I felt that permission to dream bigger and bigger, better. And so I think for us, if we're able to be surrounded by people who not only are confident in of themselves, but also pour that confidence into us, I think that's a really important part of it. And for me personally, and not just for Māori, it's for all New Zealanders, in terms of, if you can say, my individual success, my individual accolades make my collective better, stronger, more prosperous, then not only does it give you permission to succeed, it actually means you kind of have to.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility to succeed, because in doing so, you're contributing to their well-being.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters for me. And so public speaking, for instance, I hate public speaking. But I know that for other people to gain that confidence, they need to be able to see a boy who went through the same upbringing that they saw in spaces that they would never even dream of. I didn't know people who went to university growing up.
Yeah.
Now my kids can say, if we wanted to, we can go to study in the United States, because we've seen that it's been a tangible thing in our real life. And us giving permission to others to be brilliant and to shine brightly is the very least of our social compact that we should have with our whānau and with our wider community.
Yeah. And it's a great message for the surrounding community to not tear down or do our tall poppy stuff, and to lift and to see this can only be great for all of us. Somebody going up one rung of whatever ladder or mountain you want to call it, that's got to be great. There's just great things. It's not that, oh, now there's no opportunity for me. And I think that's always been a bit of a, and you're right, I got introduced to that whakatauki about the kumara about 5 years ago. And I was like, it's so, and it was particularly about an athlete we were working with. And I was like, it's absolutely so true that she kept being told, because she had a lot of siblings, you know, no, like just go about your business quietly. But actually, no, you're doing amazing things. This is going to be great for your siblings. They're seeing some amazing stuff. Yeah.
I think from a career perspective, it's also one of the things that minorities and women do in job interviews and in applying for jobs and doing their CVs. We use we a lot more rather than owning our own accolades.
Yeah.
If when they have the requisite skills in a job application, women and minorities will only apply if they meet over half of those rather than I think it's about a third. Like there's a clear differentiation between having that personal confidence to say, actually, I am good enough for this job and I can step into this space, and we need to give ourselves permission to do that, because sometimes you get into jobs and people are well underqualified, even if they do meet all of those bullet points on the job description. I think giving ourselves permission to dream and to shine is something that we need to do better as a country. And that comes not changing our own opinion of ourselves, it's in strengthening the opinions of others about themselves.
I've just finished reading Moments That Lift Us by Melinda Gates, which is all about empowering women, and it talks about incredible and incredibly heartbreaking stories of women across the world. But that was one of the key points, was how often a woman will not go for a job unless she meets 100%. And it's like, you absolutely don't have to. But there's also an author called Glennon Doyle, and she talks about how often when we feel sad or excited or anything, we feel like, but if I compare my sadness to, and it may have been, the recent floods, okay, my problem is really minor compared to that. Like I don't have a right, or someone who's lost a child, and we start to go, no, I shouldn't be sad about that, because we compare, but there's no empathy. We're not going to run out of empathy, and we're not going to run out of, so you're allowed to, if that's the worst thing that you're feeling, you're allowed to feel sad, or if that's the best thing that's happened, to feel excited and not then immediately compare and go, oh, I can't because they've just done like this amazing stuff, so I can't be too excited about it. It's like the infinite pizza. Like there's not just 8 pieces to go around. Everybody has got infinite amounts of these things. And so to remember that too, I think it was a great learning for me so I used to always be like, oh, it's not that bad, because actually I can feel what I feel and move through it and not have to compare that somewhere else. I think that all fits in really, really tightly. So we'll move into community. So for community, whether it's line dancing, Kapa Haka, rugby, knitting groups, like community is anywhere where you can be a part of something and meaningfully contribute. So talk to us about Māori social structures and what sense of community means for you.
I think community is everything for me. I think it's always been the case where, like, I lived across the road from our marae in Takapua here. We were there probably as much as we were at home. And right next door was my great aunt's house. We were right around the corner from my grandparents' house. And the ability to just walk through the streets, walk into any house, like we'd deliver bread and baking from our different nannies around the park. I think it was just such a beautiful sense of belonging that community offers you. And I think it's not by accident that the sense of belonging comes. And so you don't have to have a physical community in order to feel that. You don't have to have been born into something to feel that. And so it's whenever you go into a space, it's like tangibly committing yourself to building that sense of belonging. So for instance, I spent a year studying over at university in the States. I made some of the best friends of my life in that 1 year. And that sense of community, even though we're distributed around the world now, it still is really strong. I was talking to one of them this morning, even though the time differences is ridiculous. But the sense of belonging it's really about the aroha that you pour into your community. And that's the bond that it creates around it. And so you can't look for something from an extractive perspective. And this has come up a lot through this. And tautuatu, that reciprocity is a key part of our cultural mindsets. And so, there's a reason why in Māoridom, when you do your pepeha, you start with your maunga, with your awa, with your marae, with your iwi, with your hapu. And the very last thing you talk about is yourself. And there's a very clear purpose to that. And I often tell people, when you do your pepeha, it's not about saying who you are necessarily, as to whom you belong. So I belong to my mountain. I belong to my awa. I belong to my marae. I belong to my tribe. And in olden days, like, there's clear literature sitting around from English economists who are studying and said the individual Māori does not exist as a social unit except as a part of the communal unit. And which is an interesting way of thinking about it. And I've often think about some of the, mastering the hyphen again, I think some of the discussions about the selfish gene and how genes exist individually, but as a coherent organism. And that's how I think in terms of that element of kin selection that we have as individuals, but as part of that collective community. And we're very lucky that we're born into that. We're born into our whānau, we're born into our hapu. We have that purpose instilled in us from the start. But that doesn't stop us from creating our new communities. We're conjuring what we wish or what we aspire for them to be. And whether or not that people find that in sports, they find it in political purpose, they find it in pastimes. I played American football for 20 years, and that was very much my community for a long time. But I also do extremely geeky stuff, and those two communities don't join together. We play Warhammer 40K. Most people don't even know what that is. It's the ability to say that these communities, I can give into these communities different parts of myself, and in doing so, I am enriched in a more wholesome manner, because I have these different elements or different sources of energy coming back towards me.
I think that enriched word is like the key word, isn't it? And I hadn't really, of all the things I talk about when I talk about community, it wasn't, I say that it fills your cup, but it's enriching your life. The people that are in these different realms that you sort of move in and out of, they absolutely enrich. And that's, again, it's just strengthening the perspectives of different things and different communities that you can build. It's going to be my word from now on. Thank you. So we'll move into environment. So we can talk about all kinds of different things about environment. With you, I would love to talk about Te Ao Māori and particularly creating spaces. So how do you engineer or create environments that, you know, everything that we've talked about today, how do you create environments that make doing all of those things easier?
Yeah, I think it's very timely at the moment because as a country, we're going through some maturation in our relationship with Te Ao Māori as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think even the short time I was away, it was very noticeable from when I left to when I came back and all of the news presenters were speaking Māori.
Yeah.
And like growing up with no Māori speakers around, it was really beautiful to see. And often I'll talk about, I have a joke when I introduce myself. I say, my name's Te Pūoho, feel free to call me TP. My Starbucks name is James. Everybody gets that, gets the joke if you have a hard name to say. And and so it's just that conditioning that we feel like these are spaces you have to go into and you say, how Māori can I be in this space? And that's, for a lot of people, that's every day in their jobs, in their boardrooms, in your neighborhoods. You know, how can we move to a point where you don't have to ask that question? And to be honest, seeing how we've changed and how we've developed as a society, like there's still a fair bit of work to do, but the energy and enthusiasm. Matatini is a perfect example. I saw a lot of non-Māori in the crowd, and they were loving it, embracing it, enjoying it, and it was beautiful. And I just love that. I've had people performing in my Kapa Haka groups from high school who were like British, and they just jumped in boots and all. And I think that's a beautiful thing to create, that people feel safe to step into those spaces. But for me, it's around empathizing for people who do kind of fit in the awkward in-between spaces. We have a new generation of rangatahi coming through who have been schooled only in Te Reo Māori and only in their tikanga, and they're absolutely brilliant and shining and glowing. And then you have our ones who have kind of been in the in-between space. How can we create a bridging point in order so that everybody feels comfortable in sharing in and of themselves in those different spaces? So I often go to my different spaces in Te Ao Māori, whether it's for traditional carving, learning whakapapa, karakia, te reo, being able to go back to the marae and create marae environments for my children has been a really key part of our choices as a family, because we both my wife and I grew up at the pā all the time because that was the center of our communal living. Not like that now. And so you have to engineer it. And so Kapa Haka was about engineering that for us, engineering those spaces that they could get that pā living so that they can understand their relationships with their nannies and with their aunties and uncles, and to say, you need to wash 300 dishes today because that's your contribution to the kaupapa. But likewise, and then how do you bring that same mindset about engineering those safe spaces to share and to absorb and to be into your everyday life and stage? And so things like mentoring and leadership development is a really key part of what we do in our work. We've just launched an associate directorship program because, you know, there's lots of need to be around these decision-making tables around Aotearoa, and there's not a lot of people who come from a background or an experience as mine to sit at those tables. And the more people we can get around those tables that share that kind of space, the absolutely richer our governance will be in this country. But you need to make it safe, and we need to make pathways safe for them to do that. And there's been times in my governance career that I've said, I wish I had someone to talk to about this. I wish I had spaces where I could bounce back and forward or have some guidance in these things. And so that's what it was for us in these kind of kaupapa, create those spaces where people can be naturally themselves and still gain all of the learnings and skills that they need. And the demand for that is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
We thought we'd get 30 applications. We got 110 applications.
Wow.
And I read through everyone, watched every single video, and you just come away just feeling so sanguine about the future of our country, seeing all of these bright, glowing, brilliant people, no matter what their background. We have people from 26 all the way up to 58, I think.
Wow. Yeah.
Broad life experience, and saying we need to create these spaces. And that's a real sign that creating these safe spaces in these environments is needed, it's necessary. And if not you, then who? Who's going to build it if you're not going to do it yourself?
Yeah. And this literally, like, this funnels into every facet, like sport. Parents don't step forward anymore to coach because they don't think that they're qualified enough, even for 5-year-olds who want to play touch, or, you know, and it's how you create a safe pathway. So that's cool. Like, if you haven't got the confidence in that, here's what's in place. And we're going to also talk to the parents to just calm their farm on the sideline and, you know, and be a support. And it's the same in boards, and it's, people have to start somewhere. There's got to be an opportunity to come in and learn. We don't come in and we've already been on 5 boards. There's a time where we're a total novice. So it's absolutely, there's so many chains that all funnels into that you're talking about. And it's such a key message for so many that you're not going to get the experience until you try. And we're here, and there's this almost safety net, and we're going to make sure we've given you every bit of experience we can, but also, you know, that comes out to the confidence. We'll be your confidence until you've got it in yourself. Yeah.
And there's times I'm definitely not the most qualified person to stand into these positions that I'm being approached with.
Yeah.
And you have to be really wary of being, well, it's really good to see that the need for diversity has really sparked throughout the country, particularly around the governance tables.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to avoid being Māori glitter. And what I mean, that it's a really lonely place to be the only Māori on a board being appointed because you're Māori. That's not a position I want to be in. That's not a position I advocate for people to be in.
Yeah.
Bring your whole self to that board table, of which your ahurea and your tuakiri Māori is part of that. But you bring a wide range of things. Don't just be the Māori glitter.
Yeah.
And don't be the one Māori that sits across all of the boards. We need to create space. We need to leave the ladder down for other people to be around. Because it's not until we have multiple people in these kind of spaces that we start to promulgate meaningful change around those decision-making spaces. Same thing goes with wahine, same thing goes with LGBT communities. So we can't have one person carrying the burden of our entire demographic, our entire population. We need to give them some backup.
Yeah.
And that comes with a requirement that we need to build. We need to build that succession, and we need to commit to the long term.
And not take, so we talked to Rajna Patel, who's got Tāmaki Health up in Tāmaki Makaurau, and she was saying the same. So she's an Indian Kiwi, and she said how often she's been put in places because I'm brown. And she said, but what they then don't want is this brown person's opinion or this different perspective that comes across. And so she's been really mindful, because she was put into lots of places just because. And don't be the checkbox. Don't be, you know, take the opportunity and then go in and make a difference. But when you're there, make a difference. And if you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're not able to make change and be heard, then is this the right place for me? Do I need to look at other opportunities? Where can I actually make meaningful change, and not just be, I've never heard Māori glitter, but that's exactly, you know, like that is.
I have to credit Rachel Taulele for that one.
Yeah.
She spoke at our summit last year, and she says, don't be the Māori glitter in the room.
That's,
we are luminous. Don't just revert ourselves to being sprinkles on top. We need to bring our full awesomeness into these kind of spaces.
Yeah. Love that. What values do you hold that are non-negotiable in any environment that you're in? So whether you're at home or at work, what are your non-negotiables that you just steadfast in?
One of the things that I really hold strong to, and it's not a whakatauki or anything like that, and it might be slightly inappropriate, but it's another saying that I gleaned off of Rachel. This idea, like, don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Generally, and it goes back to the basic respect for other people. Understand that everyone's in their own journeys and on their own times and doing their own thing, and it is not for us to judge where other people are at. We can stay in our lanes and do things ourselves, and so respect for ourselves and respect for others is really key. I think when I'm in terms of the skills, well, the characteristics or the values that I'm trying to instill in our children. You know, I have a saying that you write your values in pen and your strategies and tactics in pencil. The things that I want written in pen for my kids are what were written in pen for my ancestors. The idea about whakapapa and that sense of connectedness through your shared genealogy. That idea that everything is reciprocal in nature. It is not enough to take. You must give.
Yeah.
Whether that's to people or whether that's to the environment, it's not enough to take. We are leaving things undone unless we step up to the plate and meet our reciprocal obligations. And yeah, I think in terms of values, there is a really clear one around the different spheres of community and where you exist at any point of time. And it's being present where your feet are in those communities. So, and I think part of it is understanding that they're not all there to serve your individual journey. It's like we need to pour aroha into everything that we do.
Yeah.
I think aroha is a really clear one. So if it's whakapapa, reciprocity or taututu, and aroha, I think that's the key one. Whatever we do, we can approach with aroha. You can have hard conversations from a place of aroha. And, you know, I think if we did that more rather than approaching it from that antagonistic mindset. I'm a big Twitter user, and there is some terrible, terrible stuff that goes on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so I see that and I think, well, there's going to be people who can never bridge their philosophical divides, but it doesn't mean that we have to be acrimonious towards each other. And if you do that on a playing field of aroha, so that is something that would make everybody better, I think. And this big push towards radicalism and complete rejection of things that don't agree with your own echo chamber, I think that's probably the largest threat that we have to our social interweavings at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think whatever it is, like if someone comes up and asks you to help at work, even if you're swamped, I always say yes, because that's aroha. So there's a reason why they're asking. Start with aroha and then figure out the rest later.
Yeah.
And eventually, because of the reciprocity thing, it'll come back.
Yeah. And it links really well with belonging cues and what we put out. You know, I can't tell you how many times you'll have the same when you're working at your desk and you know someone's about to come and ask you for something and you're like in this deep thought, you know, you have got 5 probably paragraphs sitting in your brain and you know if you get interrupted, it's all over.
Yeah.
So there's 2 ways you can approach it, right? One, no, not now. Like, you know, and get tense, and you can see, or like they stand there looking at you and you keep like you're basically writing some swear words here going piss off, you know, or you can just all good, hey, give me 2 seconds and write some key points down, or whatever, you know, whatever it is in that moment, and then give them belonging cues, look them in the eye, open body language, make them feel safe and comfortable, because otherwise they'll never come again. And they might have really needed your help. So yeah, belonging cues is a lot of the work we talk about with different groups about, you know, it might put you out, but you want that person to be vulnerable and come and ask you for help, because that might lead to a mistake that costs you a lot more money, or isn't as strong if you didn't put your 2 cents within that they're asking for. So yeah.
This idea of reciprocal aroha, it brings me back to a point from my biologist days, and that's about vampire bats. This is a real tangent, but vampire bats practice what's called reciprocal altruism. And so when they go out to feed, if one of them comes back and wasn't able to feed, another one will share its food with it. So they'll only do that under the expectation that that bat will go away and will reciprocate at some point. And it's a really gross way of going roundabout in ecological circumstances to come back to what we need to do as a society, is that you start with aroha, but it's got to be on that plane where reciprocity is something that we practice all the time. Because if someone keeps asking me for help, but it never flows the other way, my chances of being as effusive with my support as previously is going to diminish. But, you know, that's social expectations need to be set in our environments to say, I will help you if you will help me. It's not a quid pro quo, that's tautu, because that's the balanced exchange that our society should require.
That was a great tangent and a great example of your master of the hyphen.
Very random.
Just take this over here. There's a book from Adam Grant called Give and Take, if you've seen that, and I'd recommend that to anyone watching this at the moment, talking about the give and take, because you've got your givers, you have takers, and then he talks about others and otherish, and how there has to be a line where, because givers can give everything and have nothing left in the tank, and takers can take obviously everything and not give a thing. And then there's got to be those other, so there's two that sort of sit in the middle that can give, but they know a limit of when they're being taken advantage of, and also to not expect to get things back. It's a beautiful, he's put it in a really, really beautiful way, but there's otherish. I'm like, I like otherish, because otherwise people feel selfish, and that's not it at all. Self-preservation is incredibly important in all of these environments we're in too.
And I think it's not a big mental change that needs to happen in people. It's just being a little bit more aware or avert about your offer to help. Like, you can be thinking they can come to me whenever they like. But unless, like, you extend, you have those cues, those belonging cues that you were talking about, people don't understand that. So I've got a friend who calls me every now and then for advice or support around his business. He'll always end every call say, is there anything I can help you with? And I think that's a really beautiful way to just be overt in your sense of help, and say, I can see you've given me value from this conversation. Is there any way I can repay that value? And I think that one question adds 30 seconds onto your phone call at the end. It shows that you are valued as someone, and I think it's really important.
And also the confidence to go back to that person and ask for help later. You know, it's the same as like, come around whenever you like, or here if you need, kind of stuff, and then nobody ever asks you for anything. You know, it's, and people kind of go, well, I've told them they can, like, if they want to, they will. But how do we continue to keep that door open to say, no, seriously, it's open anytime. Just give me a call. So when we talked, you used an analogy about leaving a concert and having your ears ringing. And I had this happen in the weekend when I went to Snoop Dogg. And how that's the same for you when you're in an environment and there's a real lack of te ao Māori. So talk to us about that and what that feels like and what others can be aware of.
I think it's, and I don't want people to misconstrue this as to say that I'm uncomfortable in non-Māori environments. I've grown up in both spaces, and I'm very comfortable moving in between the different realms. But it is something that you do that does take energy when you're in spaces, and like anyone, if you're a foreigner or a tourist and you've come in and you've gone to a pōwhiri, it can be like you can have nerves and an energy, an anxious energy at the time, because you're in spaces that you're not completely comfortable with. You don't always know what's going on, and when you get out, it's like, wow, I didn't do anything, but that was exhausting. I think it's the same kind of thing when you're in spaces that you don't feel organic in. And I've always been a bit of a chameleon, so being able to move between different spaces, but not everyone is as fortunate or as malleable as I am in those kind of spaces. But certainly when you spend time in those spaces, when there's a lot of little cues and ticks where you think, if I was in my own organic space, it would have happened differently. Those kind of those bits of noise add up over the time, over the experience. And when you do get back, it is that sense of like, and when you walk out of the concert and there's silence and there's something buzzing because it's feedback from everything that you've just had. And so that comes back to the idea of having that active Zen outlet or release in order to clear and to balance is a key part of that. And so there's parts of saying, how can I bring more of myself into those environments that I don't naturally feel comfortable in yet. But it's also okay to say that I can be different parts of myself in different areas.
Yeah.
And by doing so, we can move through those different spaces and then find ways to balance between them. I'm never going to be in a position where every one of my board meetings starts with a mihi whakatau and we'll recite some whakapapa and a waiata tawhito, and that's fine. That's not what I expect. But I like to go to those spaces, and that makes me feel comfortable, and I'm in those spaces as well.
Yeah.
Understanding that there's horses for courses. There's parts where you can give of yourself to bring a bit more of that organic nature into the places that might not necessarily feel completely aligned at that point, but also that it's okay to feel to not feel aligned, and to contribute to that kaupapa and then step back and go get what you need. In your spaces.
Yeah, it's the same even if you're acting outside of your strengths, or like, you know, like you were talking about not really liking public speaking, but you know you're going to do it and it's part of the role that you have. It may not be one of your high strengths, which means it saps more energy. And so then we've got to go and refill, you know, it's not that we just don't do it because it makes me tired or it's hard, but we know that there's things that come really naturally and really fill us when we're working, and there's things that really tucker us out, for want of a better word, or, you know, like that sometimes could be far against not our values as such, but, you know, not really sort of in our sweet spot. And so it's just a tiring, or you need to replenish afterwards.
I think small talk is that for me. Like certainly, like if I go to do public speaking and then afterwards and everyone's approaching and giving you cards and things like that, I have to go sit in a room for a while and just turn the lights off, chill out, because while I love the interaction, it's just not a place that I feel naturally comfortable. And I think the whole idea about being introverted versus extroverted is whether you gain energy by that interaction versus whether it expends your energy. Certainly in the latter. And as long as I understand what I need in order to participate in places, I'm actually pretty okay. I do a decent job, but that doesn't mean that I love it. And I think that's a common misperception. Oh, they're a great public speaker. I had a friend who is a stand-up comedian, and then when you speak to him, he's the most quiet, awkward person. You never expected to seeing him on stage. But that's his outlet, and then he needs to go back into his own space. So let's not assume that the persona that you're engaging with comes with natural assumptions that you might be underpinning that persona that you perceive.
Very powerful way. And it's a self-awareness too. So we'll move into portion distortion. So we talk to everybody about portion distortion, and it doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing, if you have children, if you don't, if you're in corporate, if you're not, like it doesn't matter. We all struggle with time and how we all effectively have the same amount, and some people can get more out of it, you know, or seem to do more in it, and, you know, all of the different things. So what currently or have been some challenges you've faced with time?
I think part of it for me, so I'm terrible at saying no to things. And it does come back to my values in terms of you start with aroha and you go from there. And so I often sign up to too many different things that I think are really important, are vital. And usually it's the people involved that motivates me to do things. So if I get asked to join something by someone I really respect, I'll join it to support them, which has put me in an unbalanced state in terms of taking on too much and being committed to too many things and not having enough time to apportion to my whānau and to be what I need to be at our home and with our people. So I think it is a constant reminder and to myself around that very good piece of wisdom around what are you saying yes to, and is it important enough to say no to your family. I think that's the really key one. And I think being a bit more discerning about the opportunities that I say yes to. And it's not just the opportunity in a vacuum, is it taking place in that reciprocal aroha economy? When someone's asking me for support, but I understand that they know that they know the deal and that this is tauatu in play, and I might have something similar to come and talk to them to later. And it might be immediately. It might be in a year time, but that space is open and the potential is there and created. And so for me, it is mahi. It is still a misalignment of mahi. But I think the whole idea about coming out of COVID's first lockdown and saying that we need to live closer to whānau, moving back out of the big city and being in a space where we can create something that resembles more work-life balance than what I've had in the past. But it is very much a journey, and I'm getting better at saying no things. I'm still not perfect at it. But I think it is important to make sure that people understand those social norms, that if you're going to ask me for stuff, just remember the aroha economy that we're creating between you and I, and the concept that you're doing and the ask that I might be doing in the future.
How important is it for you, or how important have you found it to make time for things that bring you joy?
One of the things that I do, if I get too overloaded with something, I just turn off, and which of course makes it worse because the deadlines get even closer. But you never want to get to that point where it's just everything's starting to crumble. And I think the ability to do things that bring us joy, whether that's Kapa Haka, whether that's sport, whether that's just mindless video gaming, I think it's really important, because that helps to reset the ledger. I don't think we realize that we've only got a finite amount of energy to give of ourselves every day. And the more we decide to dish it out, where's that energy going to come from? And having those sources, those fonts of joy for you to recharge or to rekindle that energy, is going to be vital to remain balanced. And we have to be deliberate about it. We can't just pick up and say, hey, I'm just gonna pop out for a little bit, spend some time on Twitter, spend some time on TikTok, whatever it might be that you enjoy. And the other thing is, let people enjoy stuff. Sometimes I feel guilty about watching terrible TV shows. Well, I'm not scared to admit it. I've been watching Married at First Sight Australia.
Outstanding.
I got forced into watching it by my sister-in-law and my wife there enjoying it. And then before I know it, I was going, why is Jessie doing that? And you know what? Sometimes I think, this is rubbish. I shouldn't be watching this. I should be doing better things with my time. Why? I mean, if it's rekindling some of my energy through bringing some joy, even if it's mindless, it's facile joy, that's fine. Do what you do. Do what you need to do. Let people enjoy things. If you find joy by cooking, I really love cooking. That's a really good way for me to just say, end of the day, I'm going to go cook dinner for the family and just disconnect from the day's work that way. And that helps rekindle some of my energy as well. Just be deliberate about it, and firstly understand that there is a need. It can't be a one-way system with all of your energy going out the door to other things. You need to sometimes be selfish in the fact that I can't give anymore if the cup is empty. So you need to refill and then go back into it after that.
Somebody told me a while ago, they were like, do you realize we get roughly 4,000 weeks? That's it. And I was like, well, is that not grounding and smack you in the face, get realistic about what you're doing? Because how often are you like, well, that week flew by, and then you're like, did I smile or laugh or or even just achieve, but whatever you're measuring things off. If you think 4,000 weeks, that's not a lot of weeks, right? And for my dad's dad, he was what they class as the silent generation. So like you talked about earlier, they worked. And then when they retired at 65, boom, I don't do another thing. And they sat on their deck, and particularly men, they didn't sort of help around the home. So they hadn't helped with childbearing to start with, but they certainly weren't about to start. So they didn't cook, they didn't do anything, but they just stopped. And it brings home to me, like, don't wait. Like, imagine having to wait till you're 65 to sit on the deck and chill out and enjoy. Like, too late. How do we start to really, if we've only got 4,000 weeks, how do we finish a week and reflect on it and be like, connected with friends, or I was part of this community, or I meaningfully did this, or I, the values that I hold true, I stood strong with this week, or, or I did something great for someone else, whatever it is. But how do we do that? How do we start to really be mindful that 4,000 weeks is not many? And what are we doing with it?
And so, like, I see my friends in the States maybe once every 2 years. I'll probably only see them 10 to 15 times again in my life.
Yeah.
And so when I'm with them, be present where your feet are, and make sure you're pouring your aroha into that relationship, because that even when you're away and you don't see them again for a few years, that still keeps your cup full, because you know that's there. But I think having that realization that I might see my friends maybe 10 times again in my life is just really poignant and a lot more urgent. And we can't exactly be flying back and forwards from San Francisco. That's not logistically possible. But just being more meaningful about how we do it, and making sure that once we're there, they know that that we care for them, and that we embrace the relationship that we have, and that the arrangements that we go out to set up are both to create joy for me and for them.
Amazing. Right, we've got some quick fire questions to finish us off, Te Pūoho, and then you've got your day back to yourself. What is your favorite sound?
Favorite sound, hitting crescendos in our choral pieces in Haka.
It sounded beautiful. What are your favorite books?
There's a book series called The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. It's about 13 books long. It's massive, and I've read it 3 times.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
That's outstanding. All right, I'll add that to my list for one day. What was your first job?
I was a neck trimmer at Taylor Preston's Meatworks in Ngauranga Gorge in Wellington.
What a first job. What is your favorite item in Kapa Haka bracket to perform?
Well, it's got to be the haka.
Yeah?
Yeah. Love the
Goosebumps.
haka.
Goosebumps. What is your go-to pick-me-up song?
Ooh. I think it's got to be Dreams, Fleetwood Mac. I'm not sure if it's just fresh in my mind because of the whole TikTok revolution that's come on the back of some recent filming. But Dreams is just one that I love. Yeah, good song.
Okay. I need to get on TikTok to see what we're talking about. All right.
I'm also not on TikTok. So.
Oh. I definitely know the song, don't worry. Yeah. What is your favorite whakatauki or quote?
That would be one that's really poignant for what I do. It's e rua te pūtea me te kumara, kaore he hua ona ki tua o te whāngai tāngata. And that means money is like a kumara. Its true and only value exists in feeding people.
I love that. I love that, right? What is your best remote work tip?
Don't work in a garage where there's a washing machine and dryer running all the time behind you. No, for me, it's invest in your setup. Don't think it's okay to be crunched over with a tiny little screen that you have to squint at with a terrible mouse and terrible keyboard. Invest in your setup, invest in yourself, because you're going to be spending a lot of time there.
And last one, qualities you love about yourself.
Again, the kaore te kumara kōrero is tough to. I think optimism. I think I'm ruthlessly optimistic all the time. I see the best in people. I see the best in the world, and I aim at that part of the curve rather than the part that can be relatively depressing. And I think being optimistic is a really key part, because we're in the drudgery so much. So being optimistic and being inquisitive are probably the 2 things that I would say.
Yeah. And I'm glad you still answered it and didn't go, I don't know, after our self-deprecating chat and our Kumu chat. It's very powerful. Well, thank you so much. This has been outstanding. We've gone over time because I kept asking extra questions, but there's, I think, for anybody watching, talking about being present, we are talking about bringing people with you and strengthening yourself in order to strengthen the community that you're bringing with you. There's so many amazing key messages about contributing to community and about, you know, filling your cup in lots of different places and connecting to so many people in order to be amazing and do what you do. So thank you so much for your time. And for everyone watching, please let us know all your favorite parts from today. Share it with anybody that you think is going to just adore this. I think this is going to go really wide. And let us know. So we'll see you again soon. Ka kite.
Ka kite.